Hello, everyone, and welcome to this OECD Schools Plus Generative AI in the Classroom discussion on hype or reality. My name is Andrew Jack from the Financial Times. I write about education and oversee the free FT service for schools. And nothing has been more central to the debates that I've had with teachers, with schools, with students over the past few months than AI. So over the next hour, we're going to talk to some leading experts with different views on the trends in the field. And I hope in the last 10 or 15 minutes or so, we'll also have time to take some questions from the many of you who are watching today. But do also please feel free throughout the session to make comments using the chat function. Today, a reminder, of course, is World Teachers' Day, and that's very much something that links in, of course, to this theme. We're recognizing the teaching profession, and this event is very much about putting teachers at the center of the conversation on generative AI. So our aim today is to talk about the impact of GenAI on teaching, how teachers can be supported to take advantage of it, are systems adapting quickly enough and mitigating at the same time the risks and thinking about the safeguarding of students that's required. And ultimately, is GenAI going to revolutionize teaching and learning, or will it simply be considered an additional resource? So delighted to be joined by our panelists today, who you can see. We have Andrea Schleicher, Director of Education and Skills for the OECD, Anna Duchenka, Vice Principal and an English teacher at Vinnytsia Primary School in Ukraine, Patty Ruiz, a Senior Researcher at the US nonprofit Digital Promise, Peter Johnson, Director of Professional Learning and Development at the Principals and Vice Principals Association in British Columbia, and Larry Flanagan, the European President of Education International. So to set the scene, we're first of all just going to take a bit of a temperature of the many hundreds of you who are watching with a poll, which hopefully will now come up onto your screens. So we're asking how often you use generative AI tools such as Bard, ChatGPT, and so on. So please now fill in the poll on the screen so we can get a sense of the extent to which you're using it. A reminder that this event, as you're filling in the poll, is co-organized with the OECD Schools Plus network, a new network which brings together those working with schools to identify the important trends around evidence and practice. And in particular, we've got two network participants who have that focus, Digital Promise and the European School Network. So hopefully you've all had a time to fill in the brief poll. And while we gather the results, let me hand over first to Andrea Schleicher, the Director of Education and Skills at the OECD, who's going to set the scene for a few minutes to better understand what generative AI might mean for teaching and learning, which is based, his remarks, on a paper that's now out for consultation, and we've put in the chat here. So do please read that and share your insights with the OECD team. So Andreas, please, over to you.
Thanks so much, Andrew. And I want to say how important and great it is that we dedicate today to the teachers of the world. You know, these are the people who commit their lives every day to, help young people realize their dreams, and that is nothing can be more important. And we also should recognize they do that often in really difficult conditions, and often without the appreciation they deserve. And then, these days teachers start to worry what artificial intelligence might do to them, and I will speak to that. But let's never forget that education is not a transactional business. It's always a social and relational experience, and students will always learn best from teachers they love, and no artificial intelligence is going to make up for that. And artificial intelligence is also not going to make up for natural stupidity. I mean, AI is not a magic power. It's just an amazing amplifier. It's just a great accelerator. It's going to accelerate, amplify good ideas and good educational practice in the same way it amplifies poor ideas and poor practice. Now, it can, super empower teachers to understand better how different students learn differently, or it can disempower them to become, the masters of scripted lessons plans. So I think this is something that is all in our hands. There is no automaticity, no magic to that. No? But let me share a few kind of pointers on that with you. I mean, what is clear is, during the pandemic, schools have woken up to this digital world, this AI world that is just transforming learning in amazing ways. The greatest promise of AI lies in, a much greater personalization of learning experiences. While you study mathematics on a computer, the computer can figure out how you learn, and that makes your learning so much more granular, so much more, interactive, so much more fun. Now, that's also important. Game-based learning environments powered by AI make learning really sort of interesting, engaging. Now, why do kids love to play computer games? Because it's the interaction with learning. Virtual reality is embedding learners in a three-dimensional world. You can now do real things. Now, why would you want to listen to your teacher explaining the results of a scientific experiment when you can do that experiment in a virtual laboratory? This is the power of AI, of other technologies. Now, augmented reality, beaming the virtual world in real time into the real world, helping us better understand the context around us. Some people still question, do you want to have AI-powered robots in your classroom? And, I'm not sure myself. I think this is a very kind of contested, controversial space. But, there are some areas where we have seen really, really good results with this. Language learning is a good example. The only way you don't learn a language is by having, your teacher talk about grammar and vocabulary. And robots are actually quite good to foster that kind of personal interaction with students. Or here's a study from Japan, really interesting, where they figured out that sometimes children learn best by explaining things to others than rather having teachers explaining things to them. And also that something that technology can empower. One topic that is no surprise, very, very important to me is evaluation and assessment. I would always argue, one of the greatest mistakes that we made in the history of education was to divorce learning from assessment. Now we ask, kids to pile up years and years and years of learning. And then, one day we call them back and say, tell me everything that you learned, in a very artificial, a constraint, setting, and we call that an exam. And that has made learning so superficial. It has made teaching often superficial. And again, technology now allows us to reintegrate that world of learning and assessment. While you study, you can get that personalized feedback in ways you never get before. And teachers, can become data scientists, understand learning patterns, how different students learn differently, and then, redesign pedagogies. This is just all an amazing world that we have created, that AI is super empowering. Now, if you think about, the power of artificial intelligence in greater detail, now there are some areas where it is really, helping us redesign new work, this, point of feedback and support, or integrate learning and assessment, fostering classroom interaction, giving teachers better feedback of their things, fostering cognitive engagement, making learning more fun, more interactive, more adapted to personal circumstances. I think, one of the biggest issues that we all have with artificial intelligence is these days, you talk with ChatGPT and you never know, where they get their answers from, the traceability. But, that's actually something that technology is going to sort out in the near term. We know that. People, scientists working in this field have answers to this today. We're going to solve that in the near term. When you think about, a few, months, or I would say, these days, we should say months down the road, AI is also going to get better to understand your questions now. With the more the training data that AI systems have is improving, get wider, the more AI is going to better figure out, amplify it. Now, in the long term, bigger question is, will AI become better than humans in detecting, identifying bias? We as humans are not very good at that. We make many judgments based on very limited experiences. That was what teachers do every day in the classroom. They know just a few students, but AI currently is often amplifying, accelerating that human bias. Can we do better? Some scientists believe we can, others are more questioning about it. And we just don't know about this. This is something that history is going to tell us. So what are the implications for our students? I think that's a really important question. The first thing is, of course, AI allows young people to discover entirely new worlds, to get access to the world's most advanced knowledge, wherever it comes from, to discover new learning resources, and then to learn, to practice, to apply their knowledge. Not just knowledge in school. As a young person, you now have access to the world of work. You can discover new occupations. You can write your job application with ChatGPT, and you get a good outcomes from this. So I think this integration of learning and working is actually taking shape. Now you can create and share, and last but not least, take more ownership over what you learn and how you learn and when you learn and where you learn. That's certainly something where AI is becoming a kind of huge force for change. And the same is true for teachers. Unfortunately, you may not see these slides in greater detail, but one of the things that our data show very, very clearly is that many teachers get bogged down by administrative work. And they do not find the time to do what is really important, working with children, because they have, such a heavy administrative workload. Now that's a waste of time, and technology can get us through that. Our data also show, when we ask teachers what actually causes you stress, actually adding 1 hour of teaching is not such a great source of stress. You can see actually a very modest relationship between volume of teaching time and perceived stress. But adding 1 hour of general administrative work, that's the green line on that chart, is actually having a very steep relationship with this. So in a way, I think this is something that we should take to heart when we actually look at all of this. And so for educators, now the educators can reduce administrative work. They can discover and prepare new types of resources in ways. They can engage in coaching and feedback and professional collaboration in ways that are enhanced by artificial intelligence. And I already highlighted, the power of assessment and evaluation in this. I do believe there is enormous potential. But, getting ready for this is about, harnessing the opportunities of AI and addressing some of the challenges. And most of the challenges are about, ethics, about equity. When you think about the opportunities, you can look at personalization. That is the great promise of AI. And then, tech enablement, that's the tool. Most of our learning environments are still like this. It's not very personal, not very tech enabled. Personalization is not per se about technology. That's also, I think, a really important point to make. You can actually have very personal environments in a tutoring situation. We know they're very effective, very, very high quality, and probably the best approach to personalization, but it's just very hard to scale human relationships. And that's very expensive, very difficult to do for everyone. Tech enablement is not a guarantee for personalization. Actually, you see so many examples these days where we just throw more technology into classrooms without achieving a greater degree of, adaptation, personalization, equity. The real test lies in, reimagining the spaces, the people, the time, the pedagogy, the relationships, not to conserve existing practice with AI, but to truly transform it. And I think that's what today's discussion can bring us about. And that means also doing better on addressing some of the challenges. There are basically 3 issues that we have to get to grips with. The first is, do students understand the potential and the risks of AI? If you do not understand the nature of an algorithm, you're going to be the slave of that algorithm. And at the moment, often we throw the tools into the classrooms without, that empowerment, that enablement to foster that deep understanding of what you can do, what you should not be doing. I also believe, we can do a lot better in creating shared standards and guidelines for this. When we invented cars, soon after we invented seatbelts and road signs. We figured out, how to make cars safe for people, that they serve people and not dangerous to people. And we haven't done very much when it comes to artificial intelligence on that so far. And I do believe this is only going to work when teachers are at the heart of those kinds of practices. They cannot just be the consumers. They need to actually develop those practices, those standards, those guidelines, those guardrails in very, very active phase. And then last but not least, Let's do better in identifying the role models, the people who are at the, ahead of this, who are ahead of the curve, who are the entrepreneurs, the innovators in education. Let's, find them, scale them, and bring them to bear. That's how we can deal with some of the challenges that are inevitably involved in any new technology. And that brings me really to the last point, technology as such is not a guarantee for success. Often we see even negative relationships between technology and classrooms and learning outcomes. When you look at our PISA results, and we should take that to heart too. The best technology is actually present, but not visible, not distracting students from the learning process. Second lesson really is where teachers are not at the heart of the design of new technologies, they're usually not very good in helping implementing them effectively. It just becomes just another layer of bureaucracy. Building teachers into the design space is really, really important. Smart education is not about the technology as such. It's about reimagining of what teaching and learning can be when super empowered by AI, by technology, by digital devices. And it means we need to shift from the technology to actually understanding and fostering and empowering learning activity. The devices clearly should be present. Now, the learning analytics are so powerful, but they should not distract students. They should not be sort of dominant in the classrooms and get into the way of the social interaction between teachers and students. I already mentioned, using artificial intelligence to empower, not disempower learners, not disempower teachers. This is the great risk that we can just become consumers of prefabricated kind of materials. And this is really where, the teaching profession, the teachers of tomorrow, governments can work together to create a more innovation-friendly ecosystem for education, set standards, create a level playing field that is governed by ethics, by transparency, by reconciling the power of AI with the needs of data protection. It means, investing strategically. This is about, creating, powerful kind of cases for this, investing in capacity, enabling students, enabling teachers, and having teachers and students co-create smart, user-friendly, open, and most importantly, interoperable tools so that we can learn from and with each other. And I hope that's what our discussion today is all about. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Andreas. And do please continue to post your reflections and questions, and we'll try to get to some of those towards the end of the discussion. I don't know if the technology has worked on the poll, and we can see the results of that, please. And here we go. So how often do you use generative AI tools? And interesting. So weekly comes up top with nearly a third of you who are watching, and there's several hundred of you, I think, online. So that's quite striking. And what do you consider the greatest obstacles to adoption? And here at the top, clearly, lack of understanding of how to use them, and very important, and something I saw that came up in some of the comments in the chat, ethical, privacy, and security concerns really at the top. And then, of course, accuracy, lack of guidance, some of the other themes that Andreas talked about in his opening remarks. So thanks very much for those. I'm going to turn now to a first round of reflections from our panelists. So let me start with you, Patty Ruiz. So you're at Digital Promise. You spent also 16 years in teaching directly yourself. One of the concerns often, Patty, isn't it, around teaching is this sort of one size fits all, and how it can fail to reflect diversity in the classroom. So you've worked with teachers using ChatGPT to do this more bespoke, adaptive approach. Tell us a little bit more about how that could help to support students with varied needs.
Thank you. Yes, so we worked with generative AI and ChatGPT specifically to develop sample lessons, and the lessons were around computational thinking across all subject areas in some US K through 12 schools. These lessons were meant to be sample lessons, so they weren't meant to be implemented in classrooms as is, but rather meant to be used as a first draft, as a starting point, as a conversation starter among teachers who then work together to evaluate these sample lessons. And others have said it in the chat, we need to evaluate the outputs from generative AI. So that's exactly what these teachers did. And we found that it's an excellent idea generation tool. It allows teachers to see examples of what they could do to make their lessons relevant to a range of students in their classrooms. And we learned a few things with this work, some I'll share later, but one important one that's relevant here is that while teachers can use generative AI tools to differentiate instruction depending on students' needs, they should never enter personal identifying information of anyone, but especially of students, into these tools, because there are issues with ownership, right, of that information once you put it in a generative AI tool. What's exciting is that there are now several groups working on generative AI tools that are being built with evidence-based data, and again, where the training data is known and transparent. And they're specifically trying to support a diverse range of students. So for example, supporting students with specific learning needs, as well as racial, linguistic, cultural, and other intersectional identities. So what we found is that this tool, generative AI, just like other emerging technologies, of course, requires that its results be checked and verified by users. And it's important for teachers to guide their students in conducting their own checks on the outputs produced by generative AI if they do go on to use it themselves. So I think that'll go a long way also in supporting diverse students, ensuring that they all know how to use generative AI tools effectively. And in chat, Martin earlier noted that, and it's a very great question that I ask teachers that I work with, and also think about myself when I'm supporting diverse students. How do we help students take a critical approach to AI? So there's a lot there, but I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Patty. Yeah, we could definitely come back, but lots to squeeze in here. So let me now turn to Peter Johnston. Peter, you spent decades working in schools, and now you're running the British Columbia Principals and Vice Principals Association in Canada. We talk often about ChatGPT in the context of learning and work by students, but of course, a huge amount of stress for parents and administrators is some of those sort of back-end challenges. Any thoughts on how ChatGPT could help take over some of those tasks? What do you see as the most promising potential of combining human and artificial intelligence?
Yeah, I don't think I'm an expert, and I really appreciate Andreas's tee up for all of us here. And he talked about an innovative ecosystem and teachers co-creating. We here have in British Columbia have 60 school districts that we serve and that I serve in. And I've been a director of professional learning development for about 18 months here, just out of the high schools. Our provincial curriculum is really progressive. And so Andreas talked about an ecosystem, an innovation of an ecosystem. And so we kind of have that here. It kind of focuses on core competencies, big ideas, some content that that takes place in individual curricular competencies. And my wife being a teacher and a family full of teachers, I have to say our teachers are outstanding. And when teachers are part of the process of creating our new curriculum, and it just actually got implemented here in the final stages of this year, we've been doing this now progressively for 10 years. So it's that innovative ecosystem that Andreas was alluding to at the top. The school system has to think progressively and innovatively. Our teachers are outstanding, like I said, but they have to have some training and go through the process, as does our school leaders. Having said that, some teachers are still coming to grips with the cell phone and mobile phones in their classrooms and how to best use cell phones, let alone AI. So COVID forced us into a different kind of thinking in all our school systems. We have to embrace that technology. We started that conversation with parents and students and staff. One of our few school systems in the world that didn't shut down here in British Columbia. So we really engaged the teams and the Microsoft and went full on learning, facilitating. So essentially, to the answer to the question is, educators, we must have a kind of a clear definition on what intelligence is. We're talking about artificial intelligence. And so when we talk to our school leaders here, just in the last year, basically, we talk about several types of intelligence. In BC, our school leaders and teachers would first look and foremost at emotional intelligence. And again, Andreas teed that up. It's that soft skills that we want to work on, but the soft skills are hard skills. And in BC, our school leaders and teachers would look at social emotional learning, or EQ. And it's huge here. And we take that first and foremost. So when you overlay AI onto that, we look at what type of artificial intelligence can help us with our schools. And what we're finding is that the school leaders, teaching staff, and students, they still need that ability to plan, solve problems, think abstractly, comprehend complex ideas, learn quickly, learn from experience. All of those things, as Andreas teed us up with, showed us that AI can help us with that. And really, the classroom should, if they haven't already, they're going to start looking differently. And I know our classrooms have changed over the last decade for sure. Our teachers and students know that the traditional homework now with AI is going to be relatively obsolete. And teachers have to be able to ask their students to demonstrate their learning, as Andrea said, to be assessed during class time. Obviously, teachers can use AI to help create professional lessons, as we just heard, lesson plans, and construct that difference. And I like that term, is the difference between AI says, oh, it can be personalized, but we really have to look at it, that emotional intelligence, and be really personal about with each unique student. And the big final question is, how do school leaders lead during this exceptional time of change? Will the fascinating, it's going to be fascinating. And I have suggested in the time here in working with my colleagues in British Columbia, that our role in leadership has to prepare them for the constant change that are constantly going to be under, because we're only just beginning, right? What's going to happen in 5 years from now? So those are some of the things that we're looking at here in British Columbia.
So thanks very much, Peter. So let's turn to a different part of the world. Anna Duchenko. So you're based in Vinnytsia Primary School in Ukraine, and obviously huge and tragic situation that you're facing more generally at the moment. But despite all that, you've been starting to use ChatGPT, I believe. So tell us a little bit about how it's been useful to you, please.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for your question. So as you have mentioned, in our reality, technologies assist a lot in providing the continuity of education, and the AI has become the inseparable part of everyday school life. I work in a primary school, and some people would argue that using AI in a primary school is not that relevant, that it should be used with elder students, but I would disagree. Because we are to develop the 21st century skills, which are very essential in the primary school, and we are supposed to develop those skills at the elementary level. The AI helps to develop such skills as problem solving, critical thinking, collaboration, and they are essential for the success in the digital age, and they can be developed through the hands-on experience with AI tools and applications. The AI helps to diversify the educational process in our school. We have just started small, and we are learning how to implement it effectively in our school with our students. We are exploring it for ourselves, but still we have some results already. Teachers integrate this technology into their teaching practices. We use it to create different lessons. We construct lessons, and we create tasks that are really interesting, motivational, and engaging for our students. Thanks to AI, we can save a lot of time for the preparation for the lesson, and especially for checking the tasks of our students, as we can get the automatic feedback for the work they have done. We also use the AI-powered games that are very important at the primary level. The AI help enrich their subject content, and it enables students to prepare projects that they didn't prepare before.
Okay, well, thanks very much indeed, Anna. We'll come back to you and the others in a second round of questions. Let me first, though, wrap up our first round with Larry Flanagan, the European President of Education International and Chair of the OECD Trade Union Advisory Committee. So Larry, what do you see as the potential of these new tools to support teachers? And can we really say that the benefits outweigh the risks?
Thank you, Andrew, and happy World Teachers' Day and to colleagues across the globe. I think the key point for me is that these are tools, potentially very powerful tools, but they are not in and of themselves silver bullets to some of the challenges we face. So the critical issue will be how they are deployed within our education system. And Andreas, in his opening, referenced learning and teaching as a relational activity. And that is the key dynamic in terms of schools, especially schools, but I think if we were discussing higher education, there are different aspects to the debate. So will AI make teaching more attractive? Well, they don't improve salaries and they don't enhance status. So there are challenges there beyond the ability of AI. But for most teachers, what makes the job most attractive, what gives them the greatest satisfaction, is successful learning on the part of their pupils. 33 years in the classroom, that was my single greatest joy, when you saw young people making progress. So if AI tools can enhance learning, then I think that will be very attractive to teachers and potential teachers. I do know that many teachers in the classroom are already using these tools in areas such as lesson preparation, identifying resources, and reporting. So some of those admin tasks that, again, Andreas referred to, that create a workload which drains the energy from teachers. So if these tools can reduce workload and administrative burdens, then I think, again, that would be a huge benefit. But Andrew, you asked also about risk. So I think there are risks around some aspects. And just to cite one example, it's in relation to assessment, because we often hear about the potential for very nuanced and personalised assessment. But for teachers, assessment should be linked to learning. It should primarily be formative rather than summative. And if AI enables or amplifies what many teachers would regard as the wrong type of assessment, standardized assessments that we see in the USA or in England, for example, then I think that would be a real danger, a real risk. The key point, I think, just to finish, the key point for me is that practitioners, teachers, need to be in the driving seat around how these tools are used in the classroom. And if the resources are made available and collegiate practice, collegiate collaboration is enabled, then I think teachers will use these tools as they see in effective ways to actually enhance the teaching and learning process. But the jury is still out on everything, I think, because we are in the very early stages of deploying these tools in the classroom.
So thanks very much, Larry. So you and others have touched on some of the potential uses, but also some of the challenges. We're going to talk a bit more about that in just a minute. So let's just now, if the technology allows, go to our second poll and ask you all who are watching to take part in that question. So what are the greatest obstacles to the adoption of generative AI in the classroom? If we could have that poll up, please. Hopefully the tech will work. And so, as you can see there, the questions include lack of understanding, ethical, privacy and security concerns, limited access to digital devices or the internet, not enough time to check the accuracy and adapt contents, lack of guidance and incentives from the school system, and bans or other system constraints. So please fill in that poll. Looks like some people are saying they're only seeing the old poll, but hopefully this one will work. Anyway, we'll give it a second if that's working. And I remind you in any case that you can all please continue as you are doing to make comments in the chat function. And I see a number of those watching have, as well as the colleagues at the OECD, have posted links to relevant resources, both that we've been discussing and others externally from Finland and beyond, I see in the chat. So thanks for all that. Do we have any results of the poll we can show?
Yep, we can show the poll now. There's still a few people filling it out. Shall we do a 4-second, 3-second countdown?
Fine, okay. So we'll just hold on for just a couple more seconds. Do please fill out the remainder of the poll, those of you who can access it, because it's really great to get, I suppose, one benefit of technology to really get a wide sense of representation of what's on people's minds and what challenges they're facing.
Thanks, Andrew, for filling the time. When the poll results show, you'll see the first and the second question, so we can just go to the second question results.
Okay, so do please post the poll.
Here we go.
Okay, and scrolling down to the results of the second one. And so lack of understanding, at 2/3 of those respondents, lack of understanding in how to use them is the biggest obstacle to greater adaptation, and then followed pretty closely, 58% I see here, by ethical, privacy or security concerns, really important. And then questions of lack of guidance and incentive and around concerns about checking accuracy. So very, very helpful reflections there, which I'm sure resonate with our panelists. I mean, Peter, perhaps coming first to you on this. So rapid evolutions in artificial intelligence. People talk about how you've got to be constantly in this sort of state of evolution and testing. How and what sort of systems have you tried to put in place to help school leaders tackle that sort of innovative or disruptive mindset?
Yeah, it's something that I kind of picked up in the early 2000s, and I kind of been using the term constant state of beta with my staff since that time. I went into a large high school in British Columbia, and it really, we could see, particularly with the new assessment strategies coming, we could see that we had to live in a constant state of beta. I had the privilege to come out of the education system and go into the private sector for 5 years in the middle of kind of my leadership journey. So working in the private sector opened my eyes to how much time they actually live in what I term a constant state of beta in every aspect. They're always reiterating, always revising, always looking for the next thing. And that mindset I brought back to the school. And so one of the pieces that I was tapped to do by my school district in Surrey, British Columbia, was to start a new learning hub. We were building a lot of schools. We were really, we're a suburb of Vancouver, so we were expanding exponentially as well. So we wanted to have a learning hub. What would our new schools look like? And so one of the schools that we were able to create was called SAIL. It was an acronym for Surrey Academy of Innovative Learning. And the things that we wanted to bring in, I was kind of tapping teachers. And again, happy World Teachers Day. I'll go tell my wife happy World Teachers Day and my oldest daughter. You got to build that innovative ecosystem that Andreas talked about, and certainly what Larry just talked about. It comes with teachers. So when I was looking to create a blended interdisciplinary school where students would learn through inquiry and project-based learning, using a variety of digital tools. The big tools back then was the 3D printer, In a changing world, students need to be independent learners, critical thinkers, collaborators, innovators, contributors, and so do the teachers and the school leader. And so that's an innovative mindset. And in SAIL, which started in 2014 and is still going, and it's a public school, anybody can go to it. It's something that we've expanded to some of the other schools. So it focuses on inquiry and project-based learning. And through an interdisciplinary program in a makerspace environment, students would be able to explore real topics that foster independent learning and critical thought rather than traditional subject taught in isolation. AI works beautifully within that mindset. And you students need to integrate concepts from math, science, humanities into their learning. And all of this is part of our curriculum in the BC Ministry of Education. It's all certified. And I took that to my next brick and mortar school, which was another large brick and mortar school. And we started integrating pods. So that's kind of, everything has to be constantly changing. Students need to learn face-to-face instruction with online kind of digital tools. That gives students that choice and voice. We talk about students' voice. They've got to be part of the process. And AI, again, gives them all of that pieces. Strong leadership in supporting the collaborative teams of educators that get together, they're team teaching, kind of like that IB middle school program. Students have access to creative learning environments, and AI just being one of the many digital tools. So having said that, that's what it looked like. You can call it up at sailacademy.ca and see what that actually looks like. But what does that look like for the school leaders, the faculty head, the department heads, the principals and vice principals? So over the last 18 months, we actually put together 4 new programs that we're going through our entire province, our 60 school districts. One's called Leading a Culture of Learning. It really builds in the aspect of that innovative mindset, that constantly living and leading in a constant state of beta. Foundations for New School Leaders, which is targeting teachers and trying to get emerging leaders to get that mindset when they go into the schools to promote these innovative mindsets. And then Exploration for Aspiring School Leaders is really for new school leaders as well. So we have specific programs, professional learning and development programs that focus on not creating that ecosystem. And just to say that, you know, we need to kind of stress to our school leaders, staff, students, parents, that the world we graduated out of high school in no longer exists. And that's kind of how I led into my meetings with my parents, meetings with my students. In fact, the world that our graduates from our schools graduated from 5 years ago doesn't exist. And we have to prepare our school leaders, our staff, our students, and our parents to have that innovative mindset, that constant state of beta mindset. And AI is only one aspect that kind of just is a great example, because it's just begun. I mean, sure. We're just on the very start of it. So those are kind of some tangible examples on how we focus on school leadership and what it can look like in a innovative, constant state of beta ecosystem.
Thanks, Peter. I want to try and squeeze in a few questions from sure. Those on the webinar as well. So let me just briefly, if I can, go to the other 3 panelists. But Patty, so we've talked about the issue of accuracy, and I think you've been involved in working around professional collaboration amongst teachers to address inaccuracies and develop lesson plans. Do you want to tell us just very briefly, please, a little about that model?
Yes, of course. So as people have been saying in the chat, you'll always have to verify the information that's being generated with generative AI and ChatGPT specifically, because it's going to make things up. Some people have called this hallucination, which is just meaning that the AI is making a connection or producing a result that it shouldn't. I prefer to call it just information that's false or wrong, because for me, it's important to remember that generative AI is a tool. It's just a machine. So it's an it for me, right? it's a large language model in this case. It cannot have the experience of perceiving things like humans can, right? So when we worked with educators using ChatGPT specifically to develop those sample lessons, we learned many things, and primary among those, that it's important to make adjustments to the prompts that you're putting into the machine, that you should give the tool very specific instructions when you're trying to generate results. And the more information you give it, the better. ChatGPT also makes things up because it's not designed to know facts, right? It's designed to autofill, to select the next best word. That's what a large language model does. So in our case, the lessons that were developed were not meant to be implemented in the classroom as is, but rather they were sample lessons, and they were meant to be a first draft or a starting point for consideration and conversation. And of course, never use the tool for information that would have dire consequences if it was incorrect, such as health information, financial information, legal advice. We've seen some examples of this gone wrong. And this is because of its tendency to sometimes make up answers in a very confident way, right? I do want to acknowledge something that Cecilia dropped in chat earlier, which is that students have time to check for accuracy, but don't know that they have to check the results from generative AI for accuracy. So teachers, please model what checking that accuracy looks like. This can be a lot of fun. It could be a really fun exercise. I've done it myself. One example is that you can have a generative AI tool such as ChatGPT generate a reference list on a specific topic that you've been teaching your students about. And then together you all can check this reference list for accuracy. And for ChatGPT, it's important to understand that its only job, again, is to autocomplete, but it can keep on autocompleting very coherently to make very long texts. It's being marketed as an information access system, but it's not necessarily effective for this purpose. For this purpose, instead, we have, the libraries and other tools that we can use. So for me, when I work with teachers, I also help them ask their students questions about the AIs and the content that's being generated with AI. And one last thing that I find helpful when I'm talking with students is to replace the term AI with the word automation. And then we can ask things like, what is being automated? Who is automating it and why? Who benefits from this automation? How well does this automation work in the use case that we're considering? And also, of course, who is being harmed? So thank you, teachers. Yeah, and I'll leave it at that. I have lots of other activities that I can share with you all. I'll put some in chat.
Thanks very much. And Anna, briefly from you, we've heard about potential, but what about some of the challenges you've faced in using generative AI?
Well, we have a lot of challenges, especially nowadays, and one of them is limited technical capacity. Not all the schools are equipped with all the necessary technologies that would make it possible to use the AI in every classroom. Also, we face the equity issues, which makes unequal access to technology, especially for the less advantaged backgrounds with low social and economic status. One more problem that we have is over-reliance on technology. In the situation that we have in our country, we often have blackouts, electricity cuts, and we cannot depend on electricity. Also, we are not provided with reliable internet, which makes it also difficult to use the AI in the classroom and in educational process. And as it has been mentioned before, we have a lack of solid and fundamental understanding on how to use AI. That's why teachers need support and training to get started, and they need to improve their digital skills. And these problems also lead to the privacy concerns. A lot of teachers are afraid of using AI as they don't really know what it is and how to use it in a proper way.
Okay, thanks very much. And Larry now, so we've got this challenge of integrating generative AI to help teachers and students, but have you been surprised at the take up, or perhaps relatively slow take up of the technology? Do you think that'll change?
Well, I think there's been fairly seismic changes over the last year to 18 months. And it will take a while for all of this to integrate itself into school practice. In terms of the ambitions that we have for our schools, then I don't think AI changes the ambition. So the 21st century skills, the creativity and problem solving skills that we're trying to develop, they remain the same. I do think there are some significant challenges which have to be addressed in policy terms, and perhaps they could be summed up by the phrase ethics and equity. I know that EI and OECD have worked on articulating some key principles, but as we saw in the poll, concerns around ethical use of AI is critical for teachers. And as the last speaker just referenced there, we do have equity challenges which were illustrated during the pandemic and which continue. So we have education systems in Europe where children don't have laptops, where teachers don't have laptops. So there has to be a resource commitment, I think, from government in order to enable much of this potential to be realised. And I think, you know, my key ask would be that over the next year or so, then we do actually create the time in schools for teachers to familiarise themselves with these tools, for good practice to be exemplified, and for teachers to be trusted to take forward the development. Because I think the key issue here is that AI will enhance learning if teachers are enabled to use AI in a way that they see as productive in their classrooms. And it will be potentially a slower process than some of the hype, but ultimately teachers will use any tool which improves the teaching and learning in the classroom situation. And I'll just apologise for, I saw some chat comment in the chat that my microphone was a bit unclear. I'm not sure it was the microphone or my Scottish accent. So I've tried to speak a little slower this time.
Thanks, Larry. And Andreas, briefly to you. So education sometimes is criticised for being slower to take up new technologies than other sectors. What do you think needs to be done differently if we think it makes sense to accelerate the use, particularly in this context of generative AI?
Yeah, I mean, one is about the use of generative AI in education, and the other, perhaps even tougher challenges. What do we learn for an AI-powered world? And on the second part, I'm actually more concerned. I think the gap between what the world needs in terms of the knowledge, the skills, the attitudes and values of people, and what schools provide is certainly not becoming smaller. It's becoming wider every day. You know? On the former, you know, I'm actually quite optimistic. I think actually many teachers have demonstrated in the pandemic, you know, there is a different circumstance and people get ready for this. I think it's often our very traditional hierarchical structures in education that makes things so difficult. The idea that we need to train teachers and then they will become better at this. I think Larry made the point. You know, we need to reconfigure the space, the people, the time, the technology, and then, you know, people actually will get on with the kind of technologies of the day and become really, really good users to this. So I'm actually very confident that AI is going to help us to make education better, more equitable, more efficient. The concern that I have really relates to the second dimension. Are we doing the right thing for the world of tomorrow? When I saw in our last PISA comparison that less than half of 15-year-olds today can distinguish fact from opinion, which may have been a luxury in the past, but now is the core of education. And when in mathematics, we teach people trigonometry, but not computational thinking, I do think we have a growing gap between what the world needs and what education provides. And I think this is where AI challenges us. The kind of things that are easy to teach and easy to test are precisely the kind of things that are now easy to digitize, to automate. Now, we know how to educate second-class robots. You know, people are very good at repeating what we told them, but what's going to make us human in this world where, you know, things that are easy to teach are easy to digitize? And I think several of the speakers here highlighted the role of, you know, not just cognitive skills, but social emotional skills. Can you live with yourself? Can you live with people who think and work differently from you? Can you live with this planet? Now, I mean, technology, let's be honest, is, and AI in particularly, those AI-based algorithms are always going to connect you with people who think like you, who look like you, who work like you. But to bridge that gap and to work with people, to engage with different ways of thinking, different perspectives, that's going to be the most fundamental challenge.
Well, Andreas, thanks very much. So many great and important ideas and concerns raised by our panelists, but also by so many of you who've been watching. Unfortunately, we're out of time for Q&A directly during the session, but colleagues from the OECD say that your comments will all be pulled together and fed into the new Schools Plus report. And I hope also they'll be able to share, as various people have asked, the contents of the chat, and particularly some of the great other resources and reflections that people have made online. But I highlight, amongst others here, points around the need to train teachers to give the students abilities themselves to take a critical approach to AI, and those concerns in general about safety, the intersection with the private sector. Some very good points about not entering personal identification and being very cautious around anything legal, health, or financial related. And then more generally about equity and bias, about that constant state of disruption, about the essential need to put teachers at the center of the development and the use of these tools. And of course, underlying it all, those continuing challenges of resources, not least in many countries of access to devices, to internet, to regular electricity, so that we don't increase the learning divides within and between countries. But some really interesting points and resources that have been shared today. So thank you to all of our panelists for taking part. Thank you all for watching and engaging in this discussion. Remember again all the great efforts of teachers on World Teachers' Day, and thanks to the Schools Plus Network, Digital Promise, and the European SchoolNet as partners for this webinar. So thank you very much indeed, and keep up the great work in teaching.